I got those beds off the jointer. This one on this side is the in-feed table and the other one is the out-feed table. The manual doesn't really say much about how to do it. It says how to set the thing up, but it basically comes complete. So you just mount it on the cabinet, bolt it down and put the belt on it and then put the fence on and stuff. But didn't really have any instructions on how to take the beds off, the tables off. But when I got to looking at the parts manual, I could see how it would come apart. And there's a jack screw there at the bottom of each one of the tables, and the tables slide up and down on the base on dovetail ways, and the jack screw goes into a nut right there, and by turning the hand wheel, then that pulls, either screws the table up or down the dovetail ways. Over there on the base, there's a bearing mount right there that jack screw goes through, and then there's a collar on each side of the bearing block, one on the upper side and one on the lower side, that act as stops to keep it from moving either direction without moving the table up and down. So looking at the directions or looking at the parts manual, I could see that by taking that bearing block off of there, that I could just probably slide the whole thing up on the dovetail ways and get them to slide off. Problem is that bearing block is bolted in from the underside, so I'd have had to taken the base off from the cabinet and then turned it over to undo those bolts to take that off. And I didn't really want to do that. I've manhandled that jointer at least 3 times. Of course, when it came in a package, in 2 packages. You had the base cabinet and then you had the jointer, and so you set up the base cabinet. I set it up on the rollaway stand, set it down there, and then put the jointer on the base cabinet and tied it down, and then put the fence on and a couple other little doohickeys. And then when I was setting it up, the tables wouldn't line up properly on it, so I called Grizzly and sent it back to them and had the tables ground to fit to match up. So of course I had to take it off to do that, ship it to Grizzly, and then when I got it back I had to put it back together again. And I just did that, strong arming it on there, just picking it up and set it on there. But I didn't really want to do that anymore. I think that's somewhere around 200 pounds or something like that. I don't remember what the exact weight of the jointer is, but I didn't want to be picking it up. Each one of those tables probably weighs about 45 pounds or something like that, maybe a little more. Anyway, they're a lot lighter individually than they are all together. And I'm taking the base off of the cabinet anyway to get down underneath there to clean all that mouse crap and urine out of there and stuff and get that all cleaned up. But I didn't want to have to manhandle it all at one time. I also wanted to take it apart and clean up those dovetails and clean up all that stuff so that thing slides like it should and everything moves nice and smoothly. But I can start working on these and getting these cleaned up now, and then do that later, and then we got to start putting it all together. Well, this is the jack screw that adjusts the table up and down. Got a screw here going through this nut, and then there's a bolt here on this side of it that holds it in there, keeps it from coming back out this way too far. You can see it's a little bit dirty. We'll clean this up. It's got a dovetail on it that slides through dovetail on the machine, on the table. And then we've got a screw in here. This other collar slides on there that keeps the shaft steady in the bearing block and keeps the shaft from moving up and down when you screw it in and out, instead of the table moving up and down. But the set screw's actually got a pocket that it goes into right there in the shaft. I took that little bolt out of the end of that, so this thing will screw right out of there, and it's pretty clean. I might take it over on the wire brush and just burnish that screw up just a little bit, but it looks pretty good. This has got some dirt on it and stuff, but I'm going to lube that up with some molybdenum disulfate, which doesn't, it dries in there, yeah, kind of like graphite, and then the dirt and stuff won't, the sawdust won't collect on it. See, that's a raw edge, and it's still fairly clean, but it's starting to show just a little bit of brown from rust. Same with this, where they made it up together. I have to see what I can do about cleaning those up. And I've got some edges on here that are kind of rough, and they don't hurt anything being that way, but I'm going to go ahead and take a file and smooth them up anyway. Smooth edges are less likely to catch dust and dirt and stuff, and less likely to rust. Okay, I think I'm going to take a wire wheel and clean up some of those rusty spots on there. This is actually in pretty good shape under here. A little bit of rust showing on it here and there, but no pits or anything. I've got rust on these dovetail ways a little bit. Caught it just in time, I think. And anyway, I'm going to clean this side up, and then I'm going to coat everything with peralkatone to keep it from rusting again. Or maybe spray it with Exo Rust, but I think I'll coat it all with peralkatone. I got that infeed table cleaned up pretty good, and I was going to paint the inside of it there with some Rust-Oleum or some Exo Rust. Turned out, I got to looking, and I had a can of Rust-Oleum that was just about the right color to match the Grizzly. It's a little bit darker, but matches pretty good. So I went ahead and taped off the data plate on there and the ways and a couple other spots that don't get painted. And after I cleaned it up and wiped it down with some acetone, I went ahead and put a coat of paint on it. So we'll let that one dry up, and I'll work on the rest of it tomorrow. I'll work on the other two pieces tomorrow. Don't look like I'm going to be flying anytime soon, so we've got time for that. Well, we've been having some pretty nasty weather here the last few days. Sunday we got heavy rain, some wind. We didn't get as much wind here as it did out and about. Sunday night and Monday morning, it just poured down rain. Monday afternoon, yesterday afternoon, actually turned out to be pretty nice. There's still a little bit windy out around the country. And last night, it poured down rain again early this morning, and it cleared off, and it's been a pretty nice day today. Still a little breezy out in places, but not so bad. We should be flying today, but we're not. And I don't know when the next time we'll go flying is. By the time it gets weather gets good enough for the guy I work for, everything will probably be all done. That's the way it goes. I just keep puttering around here and get stuff done around here. Well, I got that infeed table all cleaned up yesterday and painted. Ideally on those dovetails there where it slides, the ways on that, you put a little bit of oil on those and keep them oiled. And the same thing with this screw, this jack screw here that moves that up and down. But with all the sawdust, when you're using that machine, that sawdust winds up getting attracted, just like dirt and stuff, just getting attracted to the oil. And then it makes a mess. It all gets gummed up. So what I like to use on things like that I want to lubricate, that I don't want dust to get in, is this Moly lube. Molybdenum disulfate. Molly be damned. That's a reference to an old movie from years ago that probably nobody ever remembers. It reduces friction and retards wear, does not attract dirt or dust. Goes on liquid like paint, and then once it dries, it's just like paint when it dries, but it leaves the molybdenum disulfate coating on everything and keeps it slippery, and it doesn't attract dust. I used to use this on the tracks, on the flap tracks of my airplane, and the tail surfaces and the seat whatnot on my airplane when I was flying it up on wheels on the beaches and stuff out in western Alaska and around places where it was really dirty and dusty. And it worked really good for that. It lubricates, but it doesn't attract dust. It doesn't build up dust and cause excess wear. It actually helps, of course, prevent wear. reduces wear, retards wear, that's what it says right there. Oh, anyway, it works for that, and it doesn't attract dirt or dust. And see, it says that right there too. Anyway, it's nasty stuff. When you spray it, it goes on liquid. It's real loose, kind of watery, with kind of like graphite, and gets all over everything. Gets over your fingers and your nose and your zipper and everything else. But say once it dries, and it's like paint, and it's not sticky anymore. It's slippery. Well, anyway, that's what I'm going to use. I've got the nut for that table sitting there. I painted that yesterday. I'm going to clean out the threads on it. I cleaned up this jack screw, and so I'm going to spray the threads on this and down to this collar, and then this portion right here goes through that bearing block on the base. I'll spray that down there where that turns in that bearing block. And then we have another collar that locks on here. That gets locked on there pretty good, so it doesn't hurt anything if that gets some on it. But the other thing it'll do, it'll coat everything and keep it from moisture from building up on it and from rusting. Well, like I said, that stuff is pretty nasty. It gets all over everything. It's actually worse than paint. You can't hardly get it off. Even scrubbing it with orange type cleaner and stuff like that, it won't come off. So I got my nitrile gloves on here. Okay, I got to clean the nozzle out before I can do anything. So meanwhile, I'm going to get a wire brush and go ahead and clean that nut out, and then I can mount that nut to the base. Now I washed that table off with lots of paint thinner, getting all of the old rust preventative and stuff like that off there, and then I washed it down with some acetone, and of course that all run down on the face of that, the machine surface on the other side. So once I get done with everything, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over again and paste wax it again. But that paste wax right now is on there, is protecting it from rust, and of course everything will get dissolved off of there, so I'll have to clean it up and do it again. 3 machine surfaces on there. There's the main face that the lumber slides on, the table, and then actually I guess there's 5 machine surfaces. There's the table face, and then there's this end where the extension bolts on. There's a machined face down over there where the rabbiting attachment bolts on, and then of course there's the dovetails there, the slides for the ways. I guess I'll wax all of those things too, but the paint's still green on that yet. It's still a little bit tacky. It's not coming off on my fingers, but it's going to take a couple days for that stuff to dry, especially in this humidity. Then I'll start working on the other one. I'll do exactly the same thing with it as I did with this one. Get it cleaned up and maybe painted. Then I'll work on the base. I got the outfeed table all cleaned up and painted, and that was actually easier than the infeed table. There wasn't as much rust on that, not as much mouse droppings and stuff in there underneath it and whatnot. And of course I'd already done it once, so it made it easier. It's always easier to do it the second time. So it's all cleaned up and painted. I've got a rag saturated with paint thinner draped over the base there. I'll start working on that. Anyway, that all looks a lot better. Well, the light wasn't very good over there in that corner where that cabinet in the base was, so I moved things around. I brought the cabinet out here where I could get to it a little easier and move those 2 tables back over there out of the way. They're going to need to sit for a day or 2 to cure up hard enough to do anything with anyway, so I'll get those out of the way. And I got the base off. It's right down there. And it's just as well I did. The cabinet, well, there's more piles of mice droppings right there on top. That would have been underneath there. I could smell it and it stunk, but I was pretty sure it was there, but there's more there than I thought. It's a pretty good pile of crap there. I'm not going to paint the cabinet. It's actually in pretty good shape. We'll see what it's like underneath where those mouse droppings are, but it looks pretty good otherwise. So I'm going to clean it up. It's got the leavings of the rust preventative on it. Makes it look kind of dirty, and it's got a couple little chips in the paint and stuff, but like I said, it's not in that bad a shape, so I'm not going to paint it. I'll just clean it up, get it washed up real good and all pretty, and get the mouse droppings out of everything, it'll be good to go. Base there, it's going to have some work on it. I haven't even looked underneath. I was starting to get it pretty well cleaned up on the top side, and it was coming pretty clean there, but underside of it there, I'm going to have to check out where the mouse droppings were and see how much rust there is there. I'll take those bearing blocks off there and clean all that up. There's some sawdust and stuff in there. Not too bad, just mostly really fine dust. Anyway, it's coming along. It's not just a matter of pulling that thing out of storage and getting it going. A little bit of soapy water on there got the mouse piles off and cleaned up and the dirt around it, but it's not going to touch that rust preservative, so I'm going to have to use the, keep scrubbing with paint thinner. Well, that base looks a whole lot better. It wasn't too hard to clean up. It had quite a bit to it actually, I guess. I've got the ways taped up on it and a couple of the spots that are machine taped up on it, but I've got a coat of paint on that now on that side. That's the outside that shows. I got to flip it over yet and paint the inside of it, but everything looks a lot better than it did, that's for sure. Well, I just took that extra nut for the outfeed table and the two bearing blocks for the jack screws, as well as the collars that go on the jack screw shaft. Cleaned those up, and I just squirted some paint on those. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. I've got to wait for all that paint to dry. And I just heard the dinner bell ring. I think I'll just leave everything sit the way it is for now and just sit around and watch paint dry. Well, the base and the two tables are pretty well cleaned up. Well, not pretty well cleaned up, they're exceedingly well cleaned up. Well, those are ready to go back together, but I still got a little bit of work to do here on the base cabinet. That corrosion proofing stuff on there was pretty thick on that, where it run down on there and gooped up, so somebody needs a muffler on their truck. Oh, anyway, I've had a rag on there for several days now, saturated with paint thinner, thinning that up, and I just tried cleaning it up and it's cleaning up pretty good. So I got a little bit of work to do yet on that to finish cleaning that up, and then I can start putting everything back together, and it won't hurt anything if the paint cures just a little bit more. Well, I'm going to let it cure for another hour or two here before I start working on things, because wife's got a bunch of chicken feed coming in on the barge today. I've got to go pick it up here now. As soon as I get that taken care of, then I'll start cleaning up that base cabinet. I had that base cabinet pretty well cleaned up, except down on the bottom of it. I had it sitting on a rollaway stand where I couldn't really get down on the bottom of it too good. There's a rollaway stand there. And there's two little tabs on each end, or a tab on each end of that cabinet for bolting it down to the floor. And those two little tabs fit underneath those crossbars on ends of that roller stand, so they wouldn't come out. I took the stand apart so I could get the cabinet out of it, and then I turned the cabinet upside down, was cleaned inside of it, got it cleaned up pretty good. Everything cleaned up on it really nice, but there was a little bit of rust spots, paint peeling around the bottom edge and on one of those tabs. I scraped that off with a paint scraper. I don't know how much of that was just rust from sitting in the damp air and how much of it was from not cleaning it up properly before painting it, because that paint peeled back on some of that when I took the paint scraper and started scraping it. It peeled back quite a bit on some of the spots. So anyway, I got that all cleaned up, and I squirted some fresh paint on it. Otherwise, the cabinet is pretty well cleaned up and ready to go back on. I think I'm going to wax it before I put it all back together, paste wax the whole thing so it keeps the dust from sticking to it so much and help protect it from the rust. But now, before I put that back on that rollaway, I've got to wait for that paint to dry. Well, I've got all of the pieces that I've done so far set up on that one workbench, and they're all ready to go back together. Anyway, while I'm waiting for paint to dry, I guess I might as well start working on the fence. It's not in bad shape. The face of the fence looks really good. Just a little bit of once over with a Scotch-Brite to clean that up really good and some paint thinner. But I'll check the rest of it around the backside and see there's still mouse piss on stuff, so I got to get that cleaned up. So I'm going through all of this. I might as well clean that piece up too. I worked on that fence a little bit, cleaned it up, and I got the face on that polished up. It was really in pretty good shape. A couple little pits on it there where the mice toilet was, but most of it was all in pretty good shape. The brown that was on it was just that preservative that had dried out. So I got that all cleaned up and polished up, and then I cleaned up the back side of it and painted it up, so it's nice and pretty. Got to wait for that to cure before I handle it anymore. But I was running low on paint, so I decided to go ahead and go to town and get some new paint. I got in there and they didn't have any of that color, the Rust-Oleum. Needless to say, I didn't get any. I didn't want to try Krylon or something else that the color wouldn't quite match on, so we'll make do with what we got. I still got the rest of the parts for the fence there to clean up. Anti-corrosion stuff's on there pretty thick on that, and there's 2 pieces left there, and I've got rags draped over them, soaking with paint thinner to soften that stuff up. I've got it about half cleaned up, or maybe a little bit more, but just not quite enough yet, so let it soak for a little while longer. Well, the other thing that I did is I went and I've been thinking about doing what I'm going to finish this wood with. If I just leave the wood bare, then it's just going to turn gray and eventually black, and I really like that yellow color of that yellow cedar, so I wanted to get something that would protect it and enhance the color of it. So I got a couple of different things to try. I've got some Watco teak oil, and I put some of that on there, and that doesn't change the color at all. That doesn't brighten it up at all. And then I've got some Cabot Australian timber oil, born in the outback, for rugged beauty and protection. It's supposed to have UV protection and stuff in it, so that's a natural color. And I put that on there. There's a section there farther out on that board that has that Cabot oil on it, and that looks pretty good. That almost looks like fresh yellow cedar right after it's been planed. It's really pretty. The teak oil stuff, I think that teak oil bleaches a little bit because teak gets dark when it gets old and exposed to the weather, and teak oil I think bleaches it out a little bit to make a natural color on it. It's supposed to soak into the wood and dry into the pores of the wood and harden up and protect it, but where that went on there, the color on it is just kind of faded. Not as pretty as what the Cabot wood oil is. So the other one that they didn't have a small container of was Thompson's water seal. They only had 2-gallon containers of that, and I didn't want to buy a 2-gallon container just for a trial. So far I'm pretty happy with this Cabot natural timber oil. That looks pretty good, and that's supposed to have good long-term effects, UV protection and stuff like that. So we soak into the wood good, and we'll see how that works, but I think that's going to look pretty good.